Welcome to Hard Talk. I'm Stephen Sacker. The next few months will do much to shape the future of Zimbabwe. After almost 4 decades of Robert Mugabe's rule, the country is preparing for summer elections and, just maybe, a new political and economic era. The man in power and favourite to retain it is ZANU-PF veteran Emmerson Mnangagwa. My guest today is his most prominent challenger, Nelson Chamisa, new leader of the opposition movement for democratic change. So who is best placed to fix Zimbabwe's deep-seated problems? Nelson Chamisa, welcome to Hard Talk.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're 40 years old. Not so long ago, you were the youngest Zimbabwean parliamentarian. Now you're about to challenge for the presidency of your country. You're clearly a man in a hurry, but your critics think you're in just a bit too much of a hurry. Do you understand that criticism?
Well, I'm a man on a mission, a man who is willing to change the face of politics, not just in Zimbabwe, but on the African continent. I'm a Democrat. I'm a revolutionary. I believe in the transformational promise, and this is why I'm willing to take up the challenge, no matter how big.
I talk about a man in a hurry because it was quite extraordinary what you did. Your former leader of the Movement for Democratic Change, Morgan Tsvangirai, died on February the 14th after a long struggle with cancer.
Indeed.
1 day later, you decided to seize the interim leadership of the party, much to the consternation of other party members.
Nature has a vacuum. After the death of our icon, a great revolutionary on the African continent, the face of change in Zimbabwe, we had to make sure that within the confines of constitutionalism, rule of law, the party constitution, we kick in to provide leadership because we have such...
But there is a thing, decency, respectfulness for a man who's just passed and for his family and for a feeling that the party as a whole needed a pause. Indeed. And yet you wouldn't pause.
There was a pause, and of course what we did was within the constitution to then do it much way after. In fact, it was 2 weeks after the demise of our president that we had to have the internal processes that then gave way to a democratic outcome in terms of who should then be leading the movement for democratic change.
Well, you make it all sound so simple. The Chronicle newspaper in Bulawayo, and Bulawayo, of course, is a stronghold of the opposition in Zimbabwe. The editorial in that paper said that we are appalled by Chamisa's lust for power and the disrespect he's shown to his leader by angling for his position just a day after his death.
Well, they must be appalled because they are rooting for the ruling party. They support the ruling party. They would want to see the opposition in disarray. They would want to see us in 6s and 7s. We have not given them a chance. What we want to have in Zimbabwe is to have Zimbabweans having a real chance to fight for democracy, to have an alternative, and to have the birth of a new order.
But there is disarray. That's the problem. There's disarray because at the time of his death, Morgan Tsvangirai had 3 different deputies, of whom you were one.
Yeah.
But one of the others, who was a long-standing vice president of the party, Toko Kupe, she was so infuriated by your grab for the reins of power that she refused to accept it, and now she's running as an alternative MDC leader with her own team, her own platform, and a determination to destroy you.
The build-up of democracy is that we must have the more the merrier. And the fact that she has decided to walk away is actually something that is regrettable, but something that has not shaken the base.
But you say we wanted to avoid disarray. You haven't avoided disarray, have you? In fact, you've made the chaos inside your party something of a standing joke.
Which is the most popular alliance. You know, you go across the whole country in Zimbabwe, the mood is just electric. The electricity, the momentum is unbelievable.
Well, we'll talk about that, your message and how it's being received in the country. But let's just for a moment longer stick with the politics of your party.
Indeed.
You say it was all constitutional. We did it by the book.
Indeed.
I doubt that there's any rule book in your party which suggests that young thugs should physically intimidate people inside your party that have a different view of who should be leader, but that's what's been happening.
Well, we have had challenges, and must say that the challenges are as a result of the DNA, the default setting in the politics of our country, where violence has been a major issue. We are trying to deal with
You're supposed to be different.
In fact, this is what I'm dealing with as a new leader, as a new face.
Well, if you're dealing with it, do tell me then what has happened to these young men who surrounded Toko Kupe at the funeral in the same village where the funeral was taking place of Morgan Shangarai. She was forced to take shelter in a hut, and as the local reporting suggests, there were young men who tried to set that hut alight. And as far as she was concerned, it was an attempt on her life, and these people responsible for that action were supporters of yours.
All those people who were identified because everything was under a video camera have been dealt with. We've said we are not going to have bad apples affecting the basket of good apples of Democrats. We will not accept any violent enemy, any violent element within our midst. This has been our position.
Forgive me, but the bad apples still seem to be in the basket. You say we've dealt with them. That happened. That incident happened in February.
Indeed.
On the 4th of March in Bulawayo, Ms. Kupe's supporters were again attacked at a meeting that she was speaking at.
This was a different meeting altogether, a different geographical setting altogether.
So the bad apples are still there.
And then there is an investigation that was then done to deal with those issues. And we've said, let's move forward by making sure that in our midst, we do not want people who thrive on violence. We have been victims of violence. For the past 18 years, we have been at the receiving end of state-sponsored violence. I, myself, am a victim of that violence, nearly left for dead several times at the airport, in the various circumstances, but I've said we cannot use violence to transact politics in a new dispensation.
I suppose the danger is that some of your supporters have picked up habits, perhaps even tips, from the way in which ZANU-PF and Mugabe's people ran Zimbabwe for so many years. In other words, there are bad habits that have been formed in Zimbabwe, and your party now seems to have taken some of them on board itself.
I can tell you that the movement for democratic change is a happy family of Democrats. All those elements that are bent on using violence to transact politics have been dealt with and shall be dealt with.
In what way? You say dealt with. I mean, that's a broad term. To be specific with me, what has happened? Have they been expelled from the party? Have they faced justice? Have they been in a court?
We check out all the culprits, and we also appeal to the police at any given point in time, as we did in Buhera, to help us deal with those culprits. In fact, our government, our complaint was to do with the police themselves, who actually did not do anything about it, when in fact they were the ones who were escorting the colleagues that were affected.
Let's just talk a little bit about the legacy of Robert Mugabe before we get into the election, the policy platforms, and your rivalry with Mr. Mnangagwa for the presidency. Robert Mugabe is now in retirement.
Indeed.
There he is, living in a rather grand house with grace and not being bothered by anybody. Now, you described the treatment you received from his ZANU-PF and security officials during your political career. Do you want Robert Mugabe to face a court? Do you want him to face justice?
Well, I must say that Mr. Mugabe is part of our past, is part of our old order. And I have no time for us to be pursuing the past, to be pursuing the old order. Our critical challenge going forward is to make sure that we resolve fundamental, deep and structural issues that are affecting our society.
Well, of course, deep structural issues, including surely an accounting for terrible violence. The Gukarundi killings, for example, you know, where thousands and thousands of people were rounded up and many were killed. Wouldn't Zimbabwe be a healthier society if people were held to account for what happened?
Indeed, they have to account. Part of what I'm going to do under my new administration, starting from July after the election, is to institute a truth, forgiveness, reconciliation and compensation program across the whole country to look at our checkered past, to investigate it, to be truthful about it, and to be humble about it, so that we create a new chapter going forward based on peace, based on reconciliation, but also more importantly, based on nation building. Part of the legacy of Mr. Mugabe.
But people in Zimbabwe will want to know what that means. For example, there are serious allegations floating around in the country about missing billions, revenues from the diamond industry that appear to have gone missing off the government's balance sheet. And frankly, given the way power worked in Zimbabwe for so many years, the buck would appear to have stopped at Robert Mugabe's door and perhaps Grace Mugabe's too. People want to know, are you prepared to take Robert and Grace Mugabe into a courtroom?
If I'm to be given the chance to drive the vehicle called Zimbabwe into a new dispensation, I cannot be that driver who is driving looking in the rear view mirror. The past is important, but the past should not arrest us.
So we'll take that as a no.
Yes.
Mr. Mugabe and Grace Mugabe can rest easy.
Let us look at Mr. Mugabe's contributions, his omissions and commissions. Let's say where he has had omissions, we are ready to correct, to repair, and of course we need to make sure that those who were affected are compensated so that there's proper national healing going forward.
Yes. I suppose nobody would dispute that what Zimbabwe needs right now is mature, responsible, wise leadership.
Indeed.
Would it not be true to say that in the months he's had power, Emerson Mnangagwa has exhibited all of those qualities? He did set up a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. He has ensured that the process of establishing the rules and parameters of an election are already in place. Ballot papers have been printed. He has assured the international community it'll be free and fair and invited the EU and the Commonwealth and others to send monitors. All of that you welcome, I imagine.
We don't. In fact, there's a fundamental dispute around the manner in which these elections are being manned in preparation. We're not in agreement in terms of who prints the ballot paper. We're not in agreement in terms of where the ballot paper is going to be, the security of the ballot paper, its distribution. We're not in agreement, and this is 3 months before an election. We're not in agreement in terms of the role that should be played by our important and esteemed security forces in terms of election. We're not agreed in terms of the opening
when
of
you say
spaces.
that, you do sound partisan, defensive, and maybe even alarmist. I'm looking at independent analysts like Eldred Manansungule, director of the Mass Public Opinion Institute in Harare. He says this, he says in a direct quote, "This election looks likely to be the freest, fairest, and possibly the most peaceful since 2000.
Well, he's saying it looks like. It's his opinion. And this is the beauty of a democracy. When you have a diversity of opinions, that's his view. Our view is that this election has the potential to be a free and fair election. But we need to resolve some of the fundamental issues around how the election itself is going to be conducted, whether or not the voters' roll has been audited, whether or not there's processes that are supposed to be respected in terms of the electoral amendment of the Electoral Act are respected. Just yesterday we had Parliament. We did not agree, the opposition and the ruling party, on the content, character and substance of that Electoral Act.
The reason I talked about wisdom, responsibility, maturity is that clearly in Zimbabwe, political temperature can rise very quickly. We've seen it happen in the past. It just seems to me that you and one of your associates in the opposition, Tendai Biti, have been stoking the flames in recent days. Tendai Biti said, unless we get a clear commitment from the